I am particularly excited for this conversation for two reasons. One, you are, I believe, our first professor on the podcast. But the other reason why I was really excited is because you and Andrew have known each other for a really long time. And so I'm excited for that dynamic to come forward in this conversation as well.
Brad, you are teaching and serving as an administrator at HEC Paris. And I don't think all Americans are familiar with HEC Paris. Could you give us a little bit more information about the institution?
Yeah, I think we can confidently lay claim that we're one of the best business schools in the world. We do lack brand recognition in the United States. Europe, we're really well known. We have a footprint in Asia and some of the French-speaking African countries, so we're well known on this side of the world. We lack the international recognition of our cousins down the road in INSEAD. But listen, we've got top-tier academics, the French youth that want to get into the Grande École. They compete fiercely to get in, but we're trying to build something. We're trying to be a French business school that also speaks to the rest of the world. So it's been interesting. We've done some good things, but more to go.
Yeah, you moved with the three kids and spouse from Fort Worth, Texas at TCU, to Paris.
Yeah, we loved Fort Worth, but it was something about all the reflection you got to do from the COVID pandemic. And so we said, it's a cool job. We've got opportunities to go around. And I think we were under the influence of Emily in Paris and maybe Ted Lasso. And it's been very much like Ted Lasso in some ways, except imagine Ted Lasso couldn't even speak the language.
Brad and I met, back in 2018, maybe, when I had left the in-house world, my last in-house chief people officer role, pulled my parachute and went independent. And I had this bucket list idea of writing a book. And I reached out to Gency France, who was a professor and the head of alumni engagement at University of Illinois, who was one of the few professors that I was still actively friendly with, and asked him for recommendations and wasn't sure if I wanted to do something with him or who or what. And he said, you got to talk to Brad Harris. And we connected, and Brad was trying to point me to other people from more famous brand name institutions. Like, you should talk to somebody from Harvard. You should talk to somebody from Stanford. And we had multiple conversations, and ultimately we decided, let's do this together. We found a legitimate publisher, didn't end up publishing through Kindle books or whatever. He showed me the ropes of finding a credible academic publisher. Thank you, Columbia University Business School. And we had calls for an hour-ish every week for a year and a half, maybe more. And then he helped develop not just the book, Scaling for Success, which finally made it into print in 2021. He also helped create People Leader Accelerator, which is based on a lot of the concepts of the book. And now Brad is one of our 4 core faculty members. He's not able to call in from Paris as much as we'd love to have him. The time zones are difficult, but you're still a core part of this program, and consider you a close friend. I've been to visit in Paris and been to visit at TCU in Fort Worth. We teach a class together for University of Illinois in the summer. And so I'm just so honored and privileged to have met you and appreciate the continued relationship.
Likewise, you meet these people in your life that for some reason the timing just works and they set you on a different trajectory. And you've done that for me, and we've maintained a friendship. I remember when we met, I was feeling there's this weird thing. It's hard to complain about because it's actually a positive thing. But after you get tenure, which I had just gotten tenure recently, you start looking around like, what's the next brass ring? And you feel this sense of emptiness. What am I chasing? But I just finished a book too that I'm really proud of with my old advisor, Brad Kirkman. I remember saying, I'm never writing a book again. And then I met this super interesting guy named Andrew Bartlow. And legitimately, as much as I liked you, Andrew, I did not want to write another book. And I tried so hard to push you back to other people. Boy, I'm glad that you were persistent. I'm glad that Gency was there to kind of be the glue between us. That worked out well. People Leader Accelerator. You're right. I don't go every week, but that is like a weekly ritual in my calendar that just reaffirms the purpose of why we do these things. My commitment is to try to help people grow and get better. I find a lot of value in that. I love that program, and I love the people we work with to deliver that program.
There's such a great marriage, both in the book as well as in the program, People Leader Accelerator, between like the practical realities of, hey, you're dealing with people and humans and personalities and like what works in practice. That combined with management research, academic foundations. You and I talked about this. This was part of the original concept for the book and carried over into the program of, hey, there's lots of stuff out there for big famous companies that are already enterprise, and Good to Great by Jim Collins, and what's Google doing today, and what's OpenAI up to. We've talked about this as a donut hole where there's stuff for the famous startups that aren't really startup-y anymore, and then there's stuff for the giant mega enterprises, but there's kind of nothing except for us, which is what we tried to build. There's nothing for that messy middle of orgs that are in high growth, that are backed by investors, that are trying to figure stuff out. And so, hey, I really appreciate you being the partner to build that bridge that's supported, 120 alumni at this point.
It's a real niche, and we found that out together because I think our original plan was, you have some ideas. We almost said we'll backfill it with management research, but throughout that process, we found, wow, some of these gaps aren't really being talked about at all. And so there's a gap there. Maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I love academia. I think there's value. It's fair. We joke around. It's slow. We're stodgy and things like this, but I love it. I think there's something useful about going slow and being thoughtful. But I think through our project, I also learned that the academic practice gap is real in some sense. Certainly, we've learned to agree that we shouldn't chase every bright, shiny object that you read about in the news. But I think the more we triangulated, maybe we need to tailor the message. Maybe we need to sand off some edges depending on the context. But the gap really isn't that large. Like, there is a lot of evidence and thoughtfulness that we can build on from both sides, but these things are certainly compatible with one another. That journey has been especially enlightening and revelatory to me. I think there is value in not only finding this niche in the market of what's not being served, but also showing that these things can coexist together.
For those of us who aren't as familiar with your research and your teaching, could you share a bit more about where your focus is? I know you work with actual executive teams in practice to bridge that as well, but I would just love to hear more color around that part of your work outside of PLA.
So I'm a professor of management and human resources at HEC. I'm also the associate dean. We talked about that part. But my research, and that's really my bread and butter. That's how I got to this position in my career. It's still something I love. Centers on team dynamics, leadership. By leadership, I really mean things around influence in organizations. And then I do some pretty pure human resources work. For instance, interview and selection research, newcomer onboarding and socialization, these things. But my first love, where I spent the first 6 years of my life, was studying team dynamics. And they are so messy. From an academic perspective, that's beautiful because you'll never run out of questions. Every context is a little bit different. But you move up, you get promoted into where you actually have to do these things, and you realize, no, they really are messy, and now I have to live with it.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in further into teams, because that is a topic that comes up a lot. As an HR leader, you're both leading a team, you're part of an executive team, and you have kind of a unique position there. But when we talk more broadly about good teams or better teams, what is most consistently, what do people get wrong about that or misdiagnose about that?
When we put together teams, I don't think anyone says, you know what I would like? I would like more conflict and more headache and more scheduling activities in my day. And we'll put ourselves in the shoes of a leader that's saying, I'm going to put together a team. They're actually saying, I want more or better performance. Decisions are slow. I don't know the answer, but I would like someone to go figure out the answer for me. Execution is messy, or we've created these strong silos or fault lines, and we're just so frustrated. Like, why can't that group talk to this group? I know what I'll do. I'll put together a cross-functional team, and teamwork makes the dream work, right? All this stuff we read on LinkedIn or cat posters or whatever. And we hope it works. I think the big myth there is that none of that really happens through some magic. It takes a lot of time to build and design a great team, a lot of time. Here's a simple analogy. There's no such thing as a free lunch. We know that from our intro economics class. But there's no such thing as free teamwork either. Every time we put together a group of people and we want them to work interdependently, there's always a coordination tax. Coordination tax, this can mean anything, guys. This can mean how hard is it to get everybody in a room or on a call? How are we going to make decisions? How do we deal with this issue where we have 2 or 3 extroverts that just dominate the conversation, but the real answer is sitting over here with the 3 introverts that just don't feel like it's in their best interest to speak up? So that's the collaboration tax. And it can vary by team, but it's real, always, always. What we want is these synergies, or what I'll call the collaboration gains. A good leader knows that when you have a problem and you want to put a team on it, you have to put the time and the resources in to make sure that that collaboration tax is outweighed by the collaboration gains. The best leaders know that you have to invest a lot in establishing a clear and compelling direction. And if you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere else. But it's not just about you as a leader. It's also about your team. You cannot just turn a team loose. I study empowerment, so this is a big topic. You can't just set a team out in the wilderness and hope it's going to work out. The other myth is we want teams that feel good to be on. But I'm not sure that's the right goal. Certainly, we don't want people to feel bad on their teams, but we're not trying to get teams to feel good. We're trying to get teams that feel aligned and invested. If we can do that, now we've got a chance. That's not really what we've been told.
As you share some of these principles around team effectiveness, I'm recalling chapter 1 from our book, Scaling for Success, where we had somewhat tongue-in-cheek archetypes that we talked about, the prophet and the mule driver. And they're kind of somewhat silly graphics that come with that, where the prophet is charismatic and visionary and can raise capital and can attract talent, but can't execute their way out of a paper bag, usually. Tends to operate by consensus and over collaboration and has a tough time making the tough calls. That's the prophet. The mule driver is the dictator of the organization that tells everybody what to do and like cracks the whip at the mules who are the workers and assumes they don't really know what they need to do, keeps them on blinders and steers the wagon. Those were pretty extreme archetypes, but as you talk through the challenge, like it sounds like we go wrong in teams if we veer too strongly towards one or other of those directions, and finding a clear path forward is what we're striving for. Is there a formula? Is there a magic formula where we can say like, hey, here's the Goldilocks zone somewhere between those risk points? What do you think about this concept that we created, I think, of the prophet versus the mule driver, and how does that relate to team effectiveness?
Well, we're really fond in People Leader Accelerator and in the book of saying things like, it depends. I suppose that would not be the most satisfying answer for your audience. Yeah, these archetypes exist, and most of us are in the middle. We probably under stress or when we're feeling exceptionally comfortable, we have a tendency to drift one way or another. What's best? Stupid question. It's what's best for the particular situation. And so the context matters a lot. There's some different frameworks we can use, but if we're in a simple context, we may very well still need a team. But simplicity implies there's a few variables and we can understand how they work together. And in these contexts, we can get away with being a little bit toward the dictator side. We can be really clear, really rigid in what we want, and we can just monitor, exercise control. We can exercise best practices and processes and procedures to make sure the team is on track. I would venture to say most of the people that are listening to a podcast like this are not in a simple context. We're more likely in a complicated or complex context. There's differences between complicated and complex. Where I want to go with this is as you move up from simple to complicated to complex, it becomes less clear what exactly the problem is you're trying to solve or where you're trying to go. And this is where I think you don't want to be the prophet, but this is where you have to relax your own dictator tendencies. And you have to be a little bit okay with saying, we don't know exactly what the solution is, but the only way we're going to find the best answer is to really push down some decision-making rights. And how do we do that in a way that still makes sense? It's not just delegation without any direction. It's getting really, really clear about what the overarching priority is. The future will reward clarity but punish certainty. And I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to promote clarity. Unless you're in a very, very simple context, you're trying to avoid the trap of certainty. This is so, so hard for humans. I was trained very, very closely to an IO psychology type degree. And with that, like we spent a lot of time talking about human biases, human behavior, these sorts of things. Humans hate uncertainty. We run from it. We will create false realities just to have some sort of semblance of control in our lives. And so it's natural for some people to say, I want to drive as much certainty as possible. Clarity, by contrast, and here's the quote I'm stealing from Richard Hackman, who's a late Harvard professor, is our job is to climb this mountain, not that mountain, and not that mountain, and not that mountain over there. It's this mountain. How we climb it is up for negotiation, but the choice of mountain is not. And so as you get into complicated and even more so complex environments or contexts or tasks or whatever we're talking about, you need to start thinking in terms of mountains rather than the mountain paths that you're trying to climb.
It's so fascinating. There's an element of this of like, how do you be strategic, which is like, look beyond your mountain, right? Oftentimes we do get myopic of like, I'm trying to figure out this path right now. But there's another piece of it that was interesting. It's almost unintuitive to me in a way of that the simpler the problem, the more dictator of a leadership style you take. And maybe this is the nuance that's worth teasing out is less that you need to be a dictator. It might be just more obvious of what the solutions or the execution mode will be. But my instinct as a leader was like, well, if it's simpler, then I can delegate that away. And if it's more complicated, I probably wouldn't immediately delegate it. I would need to break it down into simpler pieces to be able to delegate it. And I'm curious, am I pulling out the right nuance here? Is that, or do you have a different take on it?
I think you're spot on. Let's start there. When I hear your question, this feels more like a leader that's thinking about individual tasks that's on his or her agenda for the day. And we can delegate the simple ones because maybe they're low stakes or they're not so, it's obvious the solution. I'm trying to keep us at the team level here. So I'm thinking about priorities, objectives, tasks that wouldn't naturally fall to a single individual, but would be nested in the organization. Like a simple context and even a complicated context is really where you can throw your best engineers at a problem and they can create a process flow and we can trust them, they'll do the work.
Founder mode might be a term that could be applied to this mule driver or dictator concept.
You guys are in this space, so you should speak to founder mode, but I get it. And I'm okay with this mindset of there are certain times in an organization's life cycle when, you've really got to sacrifice and you can be all in. I think that's really, really not a sustainable long-term leadership approach for your organization or for yourself. And the fact that we've glamorized it for a time and now we've sort of pushed back. I'm not sure what the status of this is now. I don't like the glamorization of this. I think the catch that we need to be really mindful of is that our contexts are constantly changing. So even when we say like we have this simple or modestly complicated task where we can approach the world one way, tomorrow it's going to be something different. And the more competitors come in, more our head count expands, whatever. The closer we're going to become to a super complicated or even complex, God forbid, a chaotic environment, in which case that old style is no longer going to work. Andrew used the term the Goldilocks zone before. That's it. You want to stay reasonably in the middle so you can dial one way or the other without hitting the two poles. Once you start hitting the poles, it's really hard to unwind. The mule driver is going to really struggle to be a prophet. And even if they could, it's so hard to outrun your shadow as a leader. No one's going to believe it's real. They're going to say you went and did your coaching session. This is going to last for 3 hours, and then you're going to go back to being whoever you were.
Inspiration's awesome. And it feels like it's one of the things when you think about key variables to a team, like we're talking about leadership styles, but key variables to a team is something I'm thinking about as like curious in your research. What are the variables for an effective team that matter most? And like, what are things that maybe get invested in or over invested in that like don't actually matter as much as people might think?
I'm so glad you asked this question. Okay, so I think I do a pretty good job in the classroom. Andrew gave me a hard time earlier because I'm overly complimentary towards people, so I'm just buying their approval. But I think I actually have good content that makes sense and helps people move forward. There's two levers to teams. Team effectiveness is predicted by two broad levers that leaders can pull, and they can pull both. One is design, and the other is sort of this coaching, or what we might call now like the soft and fluffy elements of leadership, the influence tactics. If I say, what kind of book are you going to buy when you go to the airport and you've got a cross country flight to improve your leadership skills? Almost everyone says, oh, I want the leadership stuff. No one wants to talk about team design. The problem is that team design is by far and away like the most reliable predictor of whether a team is going to be successful or not. We ignore this. And so teams, like, do they have a compelling direction? Do we have clear goals? Do we have resources? Do we have the right people on the team? Are the roles clear within the team? All of these things are not the sexiest things in management research, but they're really, really powerful. So that's where we need to be thoughtful and we need to invest. And you can imagine if you take on a new team as a leader, you think of team design as I get to pick my people. But most of the time we're parachuted into something that already exists. We can't change the people. Or if you're the CEO and you put together a team, it's usually because, oh no, oh crap, we've got this emergency we've got to solve. Let's put together something quickly. Okay, so we should over-invest, or we should invest appropriately and firstly in design. From there, we can go to the coaching elements. And this is where we get things like team processes, the team states. States is an academic term that sort of refers to the attitudes and shared cognitions. This is things like psychological safety, trust, cohesion, even empowerment, this sort of stuff. And then from there, then we can start really talking about team effectiveness. We overinvest on things that make people feel good about their teams. Feeling good is important, but it's not most important if the outcome we care about is effectiveness. Alignment, alignment, alignment is probably the most important. This idea of clarity that we've been harping on for a while is probably the most important design element you can have. We can't just put a team together and say, help us be better. Like, the team needs a clear charge and a mandate.
Brad, I'd love to bring this into our organizations. And maybe we could talk about how this relates to company level goal setting and prioritization. As I think about clarity and alignment for a team, I think about kind of the go-to top 3 goals that most companies have, that most CEOs and executive teams have, right? The top 3, say them with me, are increase revenue, reduce cost, and be a great place to work. We've all seen that. And I like to be a little spicy and say, like, those are fake goals. Those are not real goals. Those are too big and too broad and encompass lots of things and don't help the teams actually make choices and make trade-offs. Make more money and reduce cost are often opposite. And it might result in making tough choices that make some people feel not as great as they could. So be a great place to work. So, like, typically I see these big buckets that are not effective goal setting in terms of driving clarity and alignment. And then that doesn't work. The teams don't execute as well as they could or they should. And usually leadership keeps those goals, they put them on a slide, but then the teams actually identify all their own like to-do lists. Like, it's kind of a bottoms up giant list of 1,000 things to do. That doesn't work either. And then it leads to the organization driving OKRs and goal setting at a super granular level. Like, now we're going to do monthly or quarterly OKRs for every single person and keep track to the gnat's wing of like what everybody's doing. And in practicality, that just doesn't work either. So that's the reality I think that a lot of organizations and HR leaders live in. And again, you're smiling as I describe this. Like, what are your reactions to that framing? Help us break out of it.
I think where I agree firmly is that there is an element of prioritization. What are the 2 or 3 things that are going to actually move us forward? And then we can't just say no to everything else, but you kind of have to have that mindset. We're doing just as much subtraction as we are addition when we talk about these things. I do agree with this idea that we oscillate between being too big and just so broad it doesn't have any meaning in our organization. And then to correct course, we over-engineer a bunch of goals and we end up with something that's now too unwieldy and life changes too fast for it to even make sense. So what do we do about it? It's something about being strategic. And so you and I teach this in Illinois. Like, what does strategy actually mean? And what does it mean for the HR seat in particular? And it's something about our plan to win the game or our bridge from this future state to the current state, I think is the way you phrase this. But strategy is not these big outcome type goals of we're going to increase revenue. It's not differentiating. That's every business wants to increase revenue. Like, we got to be a little more precise about what it is that's going to increase the revenue. Where are we investing? Strategy is not just the plan to win the game. We're going to be the best company ever. This is vision stuff. It's about trade-offs. Strategy is just as much about what we say no to as what we say yes to. And so you really need a strong leader, or you need to be a strong leader, and you need to have some guts, because every real strategy is something like a bet you're laying down. You should have confidence in the bet you're laying down, but you should have just enough doubt that when you go to bed at night, you're a little worried you didn't pick the right thing. Most of us should have a little bit of doubt about this. We need to be laying down a bet that we feel good about, an educated bet. And that informs the 2 or 3 big priorities, or sort of the trade-off decisions we're going to make. All 3 of us work in the high growth space where things are changing rapidly. You can give yourself that false sense of security by over-engineering your goal waterfall, your OKRs, all the KPIs. That's fool's gold. It'll waste time. It'll give you lots of numbers to present to your board. It might make you feel like you're a competent leader, but it probably is not driving the actions you need while allowing for the adaptability you also need to create real value.
We all know Steve McElfresh, longtime member of People Tech Partners. He contributed a few quotes to the book. I'll attribute to him the statement of, ideally, an organization should have just enough structure, or such that it feels like not quite enough. Just enough structure to meet your goals. Maybe that's where like this conversation takes us. Like, how can teams be effective? Don't overdo it to one side or the other. Provide enough clarity so that teams know what's most important right now and can track to that. But again, like, don't go all the way over to over-engineering and monthly OKRs by individual.
I love the way he framed that in the book and the way he talked to us about that. You can say it's still not precise, but I think it gives you some barometer inside or in your head. Like, okay, I'm almost there, and that's probably good enough for this particular context. As opposed to saying, we're going to change, I'm going to overbuild and then grow my way into it. That's a dangerous place to live.
So Brad, let's take this back to what the listeners, what the HR leaders can put into play in their organization. We're talking about clarity of goals and prioritization. Jess has teed us up around empowerment and delegation. I wonder if there's any sort of guidance that we can offer around how do you know if you are effectively aligning, if you're providing enough clarity so that you can empower people to go do work? How do you know where you're at on that spectrum of way too much or not enough?
Yeah, I mean, there's some heuristics that we can rely on. Let's talk about decision making. Are decisions constantly bubbling up to the top levels of the organization? Are they taking forever to make? I think this is a real big clue, if they are, that you don't really have an empowered workforce. You have people that are still hesitant, and that could come for a couple different reasons. Maybe they don't have full clarity on what they're supposed to be working on, but it might also have something to do with, I don't get it, and I don't feel totally safe here making this decision. And so this is something that we could frame as the two-sided empowerment problem, and maybe I'll explain this quickly. The way I understand the two-way empowerment problem, it's something like we as leaders are just begging our people to take ownership. And then you have everybody looking at you saying, yeah, I'd be glad to take ownership once I feel like you actually mean it and it's safe to do it. And that's tough. It's this idea that both sides, they're yearning for empowerment, to feel empowered, to feel like they've got autonomy, they've got clarity and direction, that they've got some impact and meaning in their work. but neither side is really confident that they can actually give up what they have to give up to get this outcome they want. It's a scary position for CEOs. I'm remarkably sympathetic to this role. Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, he's got this story in his book. They left a recording studio, a long session, and he just thought it wasn't exactly right. It wasn't the way he would do it. So he went back on his own and re-recorded the drum tracks, even though he was no longer the drummer. And sure, it came out great. The album was well received, but his drummer quit. We go forward a few albums, a few more drummers, and he gets his best friend and now late Taylor Hawkins comes in. Hawkins is good, but has some confidence issues like most of us. He's also looking at this guy that was the drummer for Nirvana. They cut an album. And Hawkins, I think, kept screwing up. And he's like, come on, it's in the studio. Why can't we just let Dave come in and do it? And Dave, apparently, I doubt he had like some business coach come tell him this, but Dave intuitively at this point knew that's not sustainable. He says, no, you've got to do it. And Dave knew he's got to let this go. It can be 95% of the way there, not 100%, whatever. But if he wants this band to work and he wants to avoid all of the drama, he's got to let this person do their job and make the decisions. I think that's fundamentally what we as executive leaders, whether it's in the HR space or finance or CEO, that's really what we're wrestling with. It's a what got us here won't get us there moment for most leaders. You might be the best person to solve that problem in the organization. But if you're solving that problem, that means you're not working on the vision, you're not working on the strategy, you're not out doing the other things that we need the executive functions to fill. That's a problem. And you can go founder mode, but you're probably going to go crazy before you figure this out. So this is how I think about the empowerment problem and the challenge and the paradox we have.
Thank you for sharing that, Brad. And time has really flown by, and we are going to quickly turn into our accelerator round where we get quick snippets to answers we have. But given this empowerment challenge, what's one conversation HR leaders should be pushing for earlier with their CEOs that they often avoid?
One question that we could ask anyone, but including our CEOs, but we're probably terrified to do it, is ask them what they're working on. And here I mean what they're working on at work, but what are they working on themselves? If we can figure out what keeps them up at night, whether it's a task, a goal, or their leadership style, something they're wrestling with, now we've been given an invitation or at least an opportunity to really add value to that person. That also gives us some license, assuming we do some other relationship building work, to call them out, to hold up a mirror at times, and then really redirect them in a way that's consistent with their own motives. So you can say, hey, you said you're working on this, you're struggling to let go. Let's talk about this one for a second, because I think there's some trade-offs that we need to be mindful of.
I love it, which is like get out of your own space and what you're optimizing for as the HR leader, and make sure you understand what your CEO cares about and what's like top of mind for them.
We are translators and we are interpreters all the time in these seats. We're interpreting what's coming down, we're translating for other people, but it is a constant exercise.
Love it. Next question is around resources to recommend. So PLA loves high leverage learning. If you could only recommend one or two resources for an emerging people leader, what would make the cut?
I love this podcast. I love the left-hand column. I'll add one more that's not an ingratiatory attempt. I find like some comfort in this podcast called Coaching Real Leaders. I listen to it going to work, and I think I like it mainly because it just makes me feel like, oh, we're all a little bit broken and screwed up, and we're all going through the same thing. So I think this is a good one. And occasionally there are some novel insights there.
And one sentence of advice can you share about how to accelerate a successful HR career in today's environment?
For an HR leader to accelerate it, I would just say to them over and over and over. And here I'm thinking about my Illinois students that are on their way up. There are no HR problems. There are only business problems.
Love it. Last question while we have you. I'm sure our listeners will want to connect with you. What's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Thank you again. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the compliments. Thank you for sharing some of your research with us, just being a great friend and partner over the years.
Jess, Andrew, thank you.